Hey guys, it's Professor Redden. Thanks for tuning in to the first video for our chapters. Today we're going to cover chapter 1. And I just want to say before I start that I'll be covering not necessarily a review of the chapter. I will be explaining the lesson material as it relates to the assignments in a way that maybe wouldn't come from the textbook. So keep in mind for the quizzes and the homework assignments, I am still hoping you'll read the book because that's where you'll find a further explanation and certainly more details that you'll need for the quizzes. So, alrighty, so for chapter 1, we will talk about the definition of communication. We will talk about levels of communication, the communication models and the different elements, types of noise, and then also we'll talk quickly about the difference between verbal and nonverbal communication. All right, so getting into what is communication. You'll see there's a definition here, right? So I don't need to read that to you. It is taken from the textbook as well, if you're not looking at the slide. What I want to say to you about the definition is that communication is a process in which or during which we exchange ideas with ourselves or others. We will talk in a little bit about verbal and nonverbal communication, but what I think is interesting to know is out of the 100% of communication, only 7% is actually verbal. And that's because verbal is including just the words that we use. The tone, the rate, the pitch, eye contact, posture, movement, those are all nonverbal elements. And so as a result, when you start adding all of those things together, that actually makes up 93% of our total communication. That's why you see the visual that I have here is of, well, they're sugar cookies, but I mean, that looks tasty. So that's why I've included them mostly, but they all have different facial expressions. And that's just to sort of demonstrate the value that we place on nonverbal communication. Again, we rely on it much more heavily when we're communicating with others than we probably would just with the words that we're using. Okay, so again, be sure that you know that definition because it will we'll revisit it in the quizzes. Something that's not in the textbook, but will come into play for the rest of our course, and I'll just take probably 30 seconds, maybe a minute to talk through it, so I hope you'll stay with me, is the levels of communication. At the very basic level of communication, it's intrapersonal communication. Intra means within, so that means when I'm talking to myself, which is actually very healthy, very normal, and even encouraged. And that's because if I can pay attention to what I'm communicating with myself, what I think and how I feel about things, I'm going to do a better job once I start including other people in the mix. And I'll tell you guys now, if you've not had a class with me before, I have a few cats who like to roam around my desk. And so you'll probably see cat hairs just kind of either floating around in the videos or they'll be stuck on my face and then I will have to take them off. So my apologies. I was talking about intrapersonal communication, again, happening internally within ourselves, everything that we think and we feel. All of that's rolling around before we go to the next level of communication, which is then called interpersonal communication. Inter means between, so that's two people. Then we go to small group communication, which is usually 3 to 5, any more than 5, and it's not really small anymore. It would just be group. Public speaking, you'll see I have listed here as 1 to many. That means it's kind of like what I'm doing now. If we were all in a classroom, I would be the public speaker, and the many, those of you who are on the other side in the classroom, would be my audience. Then we go to mass communication is just, it can be 1 to like an infinite number, let's say online, or it can be multiple communicators infinitely communicating online. The difference between each of these levels, as you probably have guessed, is the number of people involved. And as I said initially, if we don't really understand or are aware of how we're communicating with ourselves, we are probably less likely to be effective communicators the more people that are into the mix. Because the more people we include, certainly we have a greater opportunity for miscommunication, confusion, and maybe not everybody communicates as well. So our effectiveness as a communicator starts with us. and you see a picture here of a woman. She's probably giving a speech to a public. So what you're seeing here is that fourth level of public speaking. As I mentioned, the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is spent quite a bit of time on in your textbook, is are the communication models. There is a linear model, there is an interactive model, and then there is a transactional model. And we will go through each of those models and the differences between them right now. So what you're looking at here on this slide is an image from your textbook of the linear model of communication. I want to be super clear when I say this is not accurate, but this is how some people think of communication as a process. It's not accurate. And I'm stressing that because when you get to the homework assignment, I want to be sure you don't refer back to this as in terms of what we should understand to be true about communication. It's like the very basic. If you were going to maybe go get a new car and they're like, yeah, we have a base model. Yeah, it'll run, but it's not as great, right? So what you're looking at here is a picture of two people, and one person is sending a message to the other person just in one direction. Between the two people is something called noise, which we'll talk about. So in this case, if I am a sender, I'm sending a message through a channel, which in this case, the channel is virtually through WebEx on camera. That's my channel for the message to a receiver. And yeah, it talks about noise, but you can see that there's a lot that's left out of that process because number one, it's like, well, the receiver doesn't get to say or do anything. It doesn't account for all the different ways we can communicate. And that's why this is a very basic way to think about communication, but it is a good starting place. So from the linear model, we kind of upgrade a little bit. And I guess I should stop here for a second and tell you what the different types of noise are. I don't know that this is detailed in your book, but again, we will talk about it certainly in most, if not all, of the next assignments, and then it will come into play when you are giving your speech at the end of the class. Before you freak out, yes, there's a speech required, but we will spend the last bit of time preparing for that speech. So your assignments will be helping you prepare. So just decide not to freak out now. Just wait. And then you won't even need to freak out because I'm going to help you prepare. Okay, so that's just a side note. Noise, though, is helpful for you to think about as a communicator because there are three main ways that we can experience noise. Noise is like interference, anything that keeps us from being effective communicators. Physical noise is the first type, and that's anything in the physical environment. The other day I was trying to take a nap and the garbage truck was going around, and for some reason, like, I don't know, picking up and putting down the same trash can multiple times is what it seemed like because it was really loud and really repetitive and very centrally located outside my window. But that is physical noise. Something in my physical environment was keeping me from doing what I wanted to do. I wasn't communicating, I suppose, in that moment, but it would be the same if I were communicating and there's physical noise happening. Physiological noise is the second type, and that's when there's something going on with our body. Unfortunately, several people in the last year have been sick with the virus, the COVID. And so their bodies, their physiological bodies, were probably not receptive to receiving or sending messages very well, right? If you're hungry or tired, then there's something going on with your physiology that's going to keep you from being an effective communicator. The third type is psychological noise or interference. And that's when something's going on just with our thoughts. And typically this is around, like, if you are worried about something. Anytime you are stressed and worried and your thoughts are running wild, then you cannot be then focused on the person or people right in front of you. This is why public speaking is hard for so many people, because they tap into psychological noise and they just allow it to take over, and then they kind of just freak out. But we don't have to allow that to take over. And we'll talk more about that as we get closer to the speech. So again, this is a visual of the linear model. And again, it's just the two people with one message going one way and noise. So it's a good starting place. The next level, which is again like the upgraded version, has two additional variables, and I believe that's a quiz question. In looking at the image, again, this is from your textbook, you'll see the two additional variables are the field of experience, and you see those as like a ring around each person. That just means everything that I've experienced, seen, or heard comes with me as I start to communicate with other people. So if I've had, let's say, a really rough day, and then I interact with somebody, that might come into play as I'm communicating with them, or in terms of, how I receive their message. So field of experience is new. And then feedback is also a new element in this model because it says, well, communication doesn't just go one way. We actually exchange messages in a communication process as long as there's at least one other person involved, right? I would say there's probably not field of experience or feedback when you're just communicating with yourself, but we're talking now about at least two people. Again, feedback can be the message that's then exchanged either verbally or non-verbally. And we talked just briefly about verbal communication being the words and nonverbal being everything else, including tone, pitch, volume. Okay, so those are the two new elements. Again, this is not the complete way to think about the communication process. It's kind of a middle of the road, somewhat descriptive, but we use it as an example and, oh, what's the word I want? I can't think of the word I want, I'll be honest. A way to distinguish between what actually is correct and what is not. So this gets us closer, but this is not the correct version of the communication process. And that's because things are still missing. The transactional model is the third model, and that's the picture you see here, also from your textbook. You see it has all the elements from the linear communication model, which by the way are listed in detail in the book. They're not all listed here on these pictures, and I'm not talking about all of them because I do want you to read. But this transactional model includes everything from the linear, everything from, oh, I'm just drawing a blank, the interactive, sorry. And then now we're at the transactional. This is the most comprehensive way to think about communication because again, everything's in here. I have the sender and the receiver. You're still looking at an image of two people sitting across from each other with noise in the middle. But what's different is these two people are no longer called a sender and a receiver. They're now called communicators. And I'm getting ready to tell you something that's on the homework assignment. They're called communicators instead of senders and receivers because there's never a time where we are just sending or we are just receiving. That's why that last model, the interactive model, isn't yet fully complete because it makes it seem like we do only send or only receive. Even if I were having a conversation with one of you, you're sitting, or maybe we're on campus one day, and I'm talking to you about the assignments and you just stare at me, you're still communicating something to me. And so that's why we think of each person really as communicators, because we're always sending and we're always receiving. And that's why also at the top of this, you see sort of two circular arrows essentially saying messages are always being exchanged because of verbal and nonverbal communication. And the other new concept, if you will, in addition to the people being called communicators, is that our messages now can be co-constructed based on the other person. So for example, if we're on campus and I'm getting ready to talk to you, or we're talking and I'm getting ready to tell you a joke and you go, oh, wait a minute, I forgot to tell you this other thing. Well, that changes my communication, right? Just because, simply because you're there and part of the communication process. That's the other thing that makes it transactional. I want to just do a quick summary of verbal and nonverbal communication. Again, verbal communication are just the words we use. Nonverbal communication includes eye contact, volume, I said rate and pitch, posture, movement, gestures, really, again, dress. Everything else is tied into nonverbal communication. If it's not a word, then it's nonverbal communication. So that's just a quick recap of that. It's really important that you know the difference between the two because again, we use those terms as we go throughout the course. And this slide is just another way of looking at comparison is the word. Very simple word, but I forgot it earlier. A comparison of those three communication models side by side. And again, the first image you see here is kind of a quick and easy way to think about the linear model, which is like, oh, two people with an arrow going one direction. Not great. Then you look at the interactional, you have two people and you have an arrow going this way and then an arrow going that way, which kind of represents, oh, just one of us sends a message at a time. Again, we know that's not accurate either or descriptive. Transactional has the same two people, but with a double-sided arrow between the two, which says, look, both people are always communicating and changing the nature of the message because it affects the other one. So I hope that that visual gives you a good comparison. This particular model, I don't believe is in the textbook, but you can find it online. I've included the link here. So to review, we talked about the definition of communication, talked about levels of communication, the communication models and the elements, types of noise, and then verbal and nonverbal communication. My hope is that this video and all of the future videos are helpful for you, mostly to understand so that you can apply it to real life, but certainly also for the quizzes and the homework assignments. As always, guys, if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks, guys. Keep up the good work.